The envelope was still warm from the printer when my mother's hand closed over mine on the kitchen table, hard enough that her rings dug into my knuckles. "Sign it, Vanessa. Don't read it. Just sign it." Somewhere behind her, a door clicked shut. Softly, deliberately. The way doors close when someone doesn't want you to hear the second half of a conversation. My father's cologne was still in the air, but he wasn't in the room anymore. I looked down at the paper under her palm. I couldn't see the words. I could only see the date at the top, and the date was 3 days before my grandmother's funeral. "What is this?" I asked. My mother smiled the way she smiled at church, at neighbors, at anyone she needed something from. "It's nothing you need to worry your pretty head about," she said. "It's just paperwork." I would learn 6 weeks later exactly how much that paperwork was worth. $420,000. And by then it would already be gone. My name is Vanessa Cole. I'm 34 years old, and for the last 9 years I've run a small commercial cleaning company out of a converted garage in Dayton, Ohio, that now employs 11 people and turns over a little under $900,000 a year. I built it from a used minivan, a mop bucket, and a business card I designed myself at a Kinko's at 11 o'clock at night. I did that while my younger brother, Trent, was living rent-free in our parents' basement, figuring out his crypto thing, as my mother liked to call it. I'm telling you this not to brag, but because it matters for what comes next. Because the inheritance I'm about to tell you about wasn't some abstract windfall. It was $420,000 my grandmother, Ruth Cole, left specifically to me, in a will, notarized, witnessed, filed with an attorney in Springfield, because she'd watched me build something out of nothing while she worried the rest of the family would let it slip through their fingers. She used to say, "Vanessa, you're the only one of them who reads the whole page before signing it." She was right. And that habit is exactly what saved me. Because 6 weeks after her funeral, I found out my parents, Diane and Gerald Cole, had used a power of attorney I didn't know existed to sell the 2 rental properties that made up most of that inheritance, and pocket the proceeds for themselves. I found out by accident, the way you find out most things that people have worked hard to hide from you. It was a Tuesday. I'd stopped by my parents' house to drop off a casserole dish my mother had loaned me for the funeral reception, and the front door was unlocked, the way it always was when family was expected. I let myself in. My mother was in the kitchen in a robe I didn't recognize, silk, powder blue, the kind of thing you buy when you suddenly have money you didn't have a month ago. There was a bottle of Veuve Clicquot sweating on the counter, 2 glasses already poured, and my father was on the phone, laughing in that loose, unguarded way he only laughed when he thought no one serious was listening. No, tell Marcus the wire already cleared," he was saying. "420 straight into the account, no hiccups." Kid never even looked at the paperwork. My stomach dropped an inch before my brain caught up to why. My mother saw me standing in the doorway. For half a second, something flickered across her face. Not guilt, I'd realized later, just recalibration. She set her champagne flute down like it was nothing. "Vanessa, you scared me," she said, already reaching for a dish towel to look busy. "We were just celebrating. Your father closed on the Elm Street duplex." "Which duplex?" I said. My voice came out flatter than I expected. "Oh, just some property business. Boring adult stuff." She waved a hand. "How's the casserole dish? Did it survive?" I handed her the dish. I smiled. I said something about needing to get back to a client site. Then I sat in my car in their driveway for 11 minutes without turning the key, because I already knew, with the specific, cold certainty you get maybe 3 or 4 times in your life, that Elm Street duplex was one of the 2 properties my grandmother had left to me. I called my grandmother's attorney, a soft-spoken man named Harold Whitfield who'd handled her estate for over a decade. I asked him casually if he could confirm what properties were listed under my name in the will. 2 rental properties, he said. The Elm Street duplex and the 4-plex on Register Avenue. Combined appraised value at time of filing was $420,000, along with $15,000 in a savings account. "That was your grandmother's intent," very clearly stated Vanessa. "And has anything changed with that?" I asked. There was a pause on the line I didn't like. "Not that's come across my desk," he said. But estates in probate can be complicated if other legal instruments come into play. Has something happened? I said I wasn't sure yet. I was lying. I was already sure. I drove to the Montgomery County Recorder's office the next morning and pulled the property records myself. Both the Elm Street duplex and the Register Avenue fourplex had been sold 11 days earlier, sold by my father Gerald Cole, acting under something called a durable power of attorney, dated 14 months before my grandmother's death. I'd never heard of this document. My grandmother had never mentioned it. And it granted my father sweeping authority over any and all assets, real or personal, belonging to Ruth Cole. I photographed every page with my phone. My hands were steady. That surprised me more than anything else that day. I confronted my father that Sunday at dinner, in front of my mother and Trent. I kept my voice level. I asked him directly, why had he sold my inheritance using a power of attorney I'd never seen and my grandmother had never mentioned? He didn't even put his fork down. Vanessa, honey, you don't understand estate liquidity mechanisms, he said, in the tone he used when he wanted to sound smarter than everyone at the table. Those properties were bleeding money in deferred maintenance. The POA gave me fiduciary authority to act in the estate's best interest during the pendency of probate. I converted a liquid real property into liquid capital to prevent asset erosion. That's just prudent estate management. Trent nodded along like he understood a word of it. My mother refilled her wine. So where's the money now? I asked. Being managed, my father said. Reinvested. You'll see returns eventually, once things settle. I said, okay. I nodded. I let it go out loud. Inside, I was already thinking about the champagne, and the robe and the phrase kid never even looked at the paperwork. 2 weeks later, I came back to their house to pick up some of my grandmother's old photo albums Trent had promised to dig out of the attic. The garage door was cracked open. I heard my parents' voices before I saw them. She actually believed the deferred maintenance thing. My mother was saying, laughing, that same loose, careless laugh my father had used on the phone. Ruth's little golden girl. All those years of read the whole page. And she didn't even ask for the closing statements. She's too busy scrubbing toilets for a living to audit us, my father said. Let her think we're reinvesting. By the time she figures anything out, it'll be spent on the lake house. Gerald, we are not calling it that in front of her, my mother snapped, still laughing. I stood outside that garage door for a long moment, my grandmother's old albums forgotten, and felt something in my chest go very quiet and very cold. That night I couldn't sleep, so I did the thing I do best. I got methodical. I pulled the closing statements from the county records, cross-referenced the sale prices against the actual market comps for both properties, and called a real estate appraiser I use for a commercial client. The Elm Street duplex, appraised at $185,000 18 months earlier, sold for $141,000 to a buyer named Marcus DeLuca. The Register Avenue fourplex, appraised at $235,000, sold for $179,000 to the same buyer, Marcus DeLuca. I looked up Marcus DeLuca. He and my father had been fraternity brothers at Ohio State in 1987. He now ran a property flipping company 2 towns over. They hadn't just sold my inheritance. They'd sold it to a friend for roughly 70% of market value, 31 days after my grandmother's death, using a fabricated urgency about deferred maintenance on 2 properties that had both passed inspection with minor notes 8 months earlier. Inspection reports I found buried in my grandmother's own filing cabinet, which I still had a key to. They weren't managing an estate. They were laundering a discount to a friend and pocketing the difference through some arrangement I hadn't found yet. That's when I decided I wasn't going to ask another question out loud again, until I had every answer already in my hand. I made a decision that night that I still think was the smartest thing I've ever done in my life. I stopped being smart on the surface. Here's the tactical logic, and I want to say it plainly because I thought about it like I think about a difficult client. The fastest way to lose is to let the other side know you're still fighting. Starting the following week, I softened. I let my shoulders round when I walked into my parents' house. I started ending sentences on a question mark, like I wasn't sure of anything anymore. I guess Dad probably knows best about that stuff, I'd say, staring at my hands. I stopped wearing my work clothes to family dinners and started wearing an old cardigan of my grandmother's, oversized, the sleeves swallowing my wrists, a costume of harmlessness. I started calling my father for advice. Fake advice about fake decisions. Dad, should I refinance my work van? I'd ask, letting my voice go small and grateful when he explained amortization to me like I'd never heard the word. I let my mother see me tear up once on purpose at dinner, saying I just miss Grandma so much and I didn't know how to handle all this financial stuff without her. My mother patted my hand and told my father later within my hearing distance. See? She's not going to be a problem. Inside, every single time I was doing math. I was cataloging. I was thinking about the appraisals in a folder on my laptop, backed up in 3 places, and about Harold Whitfield's phone number, and about the exact words Kid never even looked at the paperwork. A phrase I now repeated to myself like a rosary, because it was going to be the last thing my father ever underestimated about me. The bait needed to be something they couldn't resist and couldn't trace back to a trap. So I gave them what they thought I already believed. I told my mother, over the phone in my new soft voice, that I'd found an old folder of Grandma's papers in the attic, bank statements, an old handwritten note, and that I was thinking about giving it to Dad since he understands this stuff better than me. I said I didn't want to be the one holding on to important documents. I said I trusted him. I watched my father's face when my mother relayed this to him at dinner. He didn't even try to hide his relief. 3 days later, I invited them both to my house for what I called a thank you dinner. My way, I said, of showing I wasn't upset anymore, that I understood the money was being handled. I told them Trent should come too. Closure, I said. Family healing. What they didn't know. I'd had a lawyer, a real one, an estate litigation attorney named Priya Anand referred by Harold Whitfield, review every document I'd gathered for the previous 9 days. I'd filed a formal request with the probate court to freeze any further disbursement from Ruth Cole's estate, pending a fiduciary review. I'd gotten a forensic accountant to trace the $320,000 in combined sale proceeds through my father's accounts, and found $60,000 of it had already moved into an account under Marcus DeLuca's flipping company labeled consulting fee, a kickback dressed up in a word. And in the corner of my dining room, disguised inside a decorative candle holder centered on a shelf of family photos, was a small recording device, legal under Ohio's one-party consent law, because I would be in the room the entire time. My phone sat face down on the counter throughout the dinner prep, buzzing every few minutes with updates from Priya. Court filing confirmed, forensic report finalized, sheriff's civil unit briefed and on standby 2 blocks away, ready to serve papers the moment I gave the signal. I set the table with my grandmother's old china. It felt right that she'd be there too in her way. They arrived at 7. My mother wore the powder blue robe's daytime equivalent, a new cream-colored dress I hadn't seen before, with a price tag energy to it. My father was expansive, warm, already congratulating himself on a piece that hadn't actually been made. Trent showed up 20 minutes late smelling like weed and wearing a watch I was fairly sure I hadn't bought him and he definitely couldn't afford. Dinner started fine. Then, 3 glasses of wine in, my father got comfortable the way people do when they think the danger has passed. You know, Vanessa, he said leaning back, I have to say I'm proud of how you've handled all this. Lot of daughters would have made a scene, caused problems, hired a lawyer, God forbid. He laughed at his own joke. My mother chimed in. We always said you were the reasonable one. Trent could learn something. Trent, oblivious, raised his glass. To Grandma, he said, for setting us all up. He laughed at his own joke too. Nobody in that family seemed to know they weren't as funny as they thought. I set my fork down. I didn't raise my voice. I never do. I actually wanted to talk about that tonight. I said. About Grandma setting us up. My father waved a magnanimous hand. Of course, sweetheart. What's on your mind? I wanted to ask you about the power of attorney, I said. The one dated 14 months before she died. The one she never told me existed, and never told her own attorney about either. The room went very quiet. My mother's smile didn't move, but her eyes did. I already explained that. my father said, a little sharper now. Fiduciary authority. Estate liquidity. You wouldn't. Deferred maintenance, I said. On a duplex that passed inspection 8 months earlier with 2 minor notes. On a fourplex you sold to Marcus DeLuca, your old fraternity brother, for 30% under appraised value, 31 days after the funeral. My father's face changed color in stages like a stove element heating up. You've been going through my private business, he said. It stopped being your private business the moment you forged urgency into a document my grandmother's own attorney never received a copy of, I said. Which, for the record, is a requirement under Ohio law for a POA to be enforceable against an estate in probate. Harold checked. It isn't there. It never was filed anywhere but in your desk drawer. My mother's voice went thin and fast. You don't know what you're talking about, Vanessa. You clean office buildings, you don't understand. I understand $60,000 labeled a consulting fee moving from Marcus DeLuca's company into Dad's account 4 days after closing, I said quietly. I understand that's called a kickback. I understand forensic accountants are very good at finding those, once you ask them to look. My father stood up so fast his chair scraped the floor. This is absurd. This is my house, my family. It's my dining room, actually, I said. And it's not absurd. It's filed. I reached under the table and turned my phone face up. A text from Priya. Filed and confirmed. They're 2 minutes out. I filed a fiduciary fraud complaint with the probate court 8 days ago, I said. I filed a police report for elder financial exploitation and forgery yesterday. Both of you are named. Marcus DeLuca is named. There's a court order freezing the remaining funds, and there's a sheriff's deputy currently walking up the driveway. My mother's wine glass slipped out of her hand and shattered on the hardwood. Not thrown, just dropped, the sound of a hand that had simply stopped working. I stood up, walked to the shelf, and took down the copy of the forged power of attorney I'd printed and framed like a joke gift, still wrapped in gift paper on the sideboard, for Dad. And I tore it slowly, deliberately down the middle in front of all 3 of them, and set both halves on the table next to his plate. You told Marcus the wire cleared and the kid never even looked at the paperwork, I said. I want you to know I heard that. And I read every page. There was a knock at the door. Here's what happened in the 6 months after that dinner, laid out the way I'd give it to you if I were reading it off a court docket, because most of it eventually was one. Gerald Cole, my father, was charged with forgery and financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult's estate under Ohio's elder fraud statutes. He pled to a reduced charge, 1 count of forgery, and received 3 years of probation, a $45,000 restitution order, and a permanent bar from serving as a fiduciary or power of attorney for any estate in the state of Ohio. His name now appears in 2 local news articles about family inheritance fraud that come up on the first page when you search it. Diane Cole, my mother, was not criminally charged. The DA couldn't prove she'd forged anything herself, but she was named in the civil suit and ordered to return $28,000 of the proceeds she'd personally spent, including a portion that had gone to the cream-colored dress and a deposit on a timeshare. She sold the powder blue robe on a resale app for $11. I know because Priya's paralegal, doing due diligence on their assets, actually found the listing. Marcus DeLuca settled out of court, returning both properties to the estate and paying $60,000 in restitution to avoid his own fraud and conspiracy charges. His flipping company lost its state license the following spring after 2 other, unrelated complaints surfaced once his name was in the papers. Trent, my brother, wasn't charged with anything. He hadn't known. He'd been as much a bystander as I had, just a less curious one. When the dust settled, I sat him down myself and told him none of this was his fault, and I helped him get into a financial literacy program instead of judging him for the watch, which it turned out was a fake anyway, bought secondhand for $40 because he'd wanted to feel like things were going well for once. I gave him a part-time admin job at my company. He's good at it. Better than I expected, honestly. I also went to my grandmother's former tenants, 6 families across both properties, who'd gotten eviction notices during the rush sale process, and personally covered their relocation costs out of the restitution I eventually received, about $9,000 total, because none of that had been their fault either, and my grandmother would have wanted them looked after, not punished for who her son turned out to be. The estate was restored. The court ordered both properties returned or their fair value paid. I ended up with $410,000 net after legal fees, $11,000 short of the original valuation, but with something else I hadn't expected. My grandmother's actual, on-paper, undeniable trust in me, finally vindicated in a public record instead of just a private memory. It was raining the night my father showed up at my door, 8 months later. Real Ohio November rain, the kind that gets into your coat collar and stays there. He looked smaller than I remembered, not just older, actually smaller, the way people shrink when the version of themselves they performed for 30 years finally gets taken away. No car in the driveway. Trent told me later he'd walked from a motel 11 blocks away because the DUI from March had cost him his license too. A detail I hadn't even known about, a small addition to the pile. "Vanessa," he said, water running off his chin. "I don't have anywhere else to go. Your mother, we're not. I just need somewhere to stay for a few weeks. I'm your father." I stood in the doorway with the porch light on, my husband Daniel a few steps behind me in the hallway, not saying anything, just present, the way he'd been present through every court date and every forensic accounting meeting for the last 8 months without once telling me how to feel about any of it. I thought about the champagne, the robe. Kid never even looked at the paperwork. I thought about 11 minutes in a driveway not turning a key. "You are my father," I said. "That's true. And I hope you find somewhere warm tonight. But it isn't going to be here." I didn't slam the door. I closed it the way you close a door on something that's actually finished, quietly, completely, with both hands. Daniel put his hand on my shoulder as I turned around. "You okay?" he asked. "Yeah," I said, and I meant it, which surprised me. "I think I actually am." Outside, the rain kept going. Inside, for the first time in almost a year, the house was just quiet, the good kind. Here's what I know now that I didn't know the day my mother put her hand over mine and told me not to read the page. The people who count on you not paying attention are usually the ones who deserve your attention the most. Being underestimated isn't a weakness. It's the sharpest tool you'll ever be handed, if you're patient enough to use it. And real family isn't the people who share your blood. It's the people who never once ask you to stop reading the whole page. If someone in your life has ever told you not to look too closely at the paperwork, I want to know about it. Tell me your story in the comments. And if you made it this far with me, hit like, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.